Welcome once again to a Human Synergistics webinar. My name is John Van Etten. I'm joined today by Peter Fenderfeen, CEO and owner of Room to Act Consulting in Cologne, Germany. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Peter.
Welcome. Hi, John.
Thank you. So for those of us, for those watching, we sort of fulfill two parts of a journey for many of the clients that we help with. Human Synergistics really focuses on delivering and providing good quantitative instruments to measure behavioral patterns in individuals, across teams, and in fact across organizations in terms of things like culture. That information and data is then used by people such as Peter, who are accredited in terms of coaching and consulting with these kinds of tools, to take that information, deliver that to clients, help them to prioritize, create action steps, and put those learnings into action. So the purpose of this is really development. If you're familiar with Human Synergistics tools, we do this across various, what we call levels, individuals, teams, and organizational. But the point is that at every level, that is intended to be a very positive and growth-oriented journey in which we base that initiative on good data and information, and typically are then again remeasuring at some point in the future to demonstrate the growth and improvement in the journey. So very happy to have Peter with us. Peter has collaborated with us and used these tools to create positive change in organizations for many years. I think we've been working together for 14 or more. Always happy to have your input and also your experiences with really great organizations, by the way, which can be read about. One case example in our in the book Creating Constructive Cultures, one of Peter Fenderfeen's good culture initiatives and continuing culture journeys is in that book as well. So thank you, Peter, for joining us and taking the time to talk about best practices for encouraging clients to remeasure these sorts of things and the benefits of that.
Yeah, thank you, John. I try to speak more from my experience than
thank you.
best practice point of view, because there are many ways, or also many I think advantages in retesting. I figured out, how could I structure this that people can follow my words.
Right.
I decided to group the advantages for retesting around that I, we, and it triangle thinking that Ken Wilber came up with. So the I is more internally on the coachee side, what's in for the coachee here. The we is in communicating with others, in sharing these results and so on. The we, it plays a major role there, and the it is more around the company, the structure, processes, and also about measuring itself. And I would like to start with that it component. So when we talk about it, we speak about tangible things like the corporate strategy, also OKR, objective key results, methodologies, and so on, that help people to find orientation or a clear perspective on what should be achieved, and having the end in mind at the very beginning of the journey. On this it side, it is really the question of how you're going to measure success from a behavioral or even an attitude or thinking style point of view. There's much out there on measuring tangible KPI goals.
Right.
But there's not so much also attention on how to measure success in the field of mindset, thinking styles, or in the field of behavior. And that continues, of course, to how to measure a successful culture. I think one of the reasons for this, and Ed Schein was stressing this over and over again, I can remember when he came up and helped you out, is it's like people want to talk about culture, but then they start to work with it, but they do not align it to a specific reason that is more grounded in the company, in the organization, and what they are doing on the business side, how they relate to customers, and so on. And so they measure a lot of data that is customer market related in order to make their strategy work. And they like to include cultural initiatives around that, because everybody has now understood that you cannot just operate on the KPI data that is financially driven.
Right.
Somehow along the way, they forget to also then continue measuring this data that is around culture, behavior, and thinking styles. And so actually along the way, all the cultural journeys that I was part of, that do not remeasure. They somehow lose track of actually what kind of culture they wanted to have, or they discover during the journey that the profile they actually create is not so much what they intended to have. And then they give up on, they don't want that transparency in the room.
Right.
Because it would kind of indicate maybe the way we operate here is not as constructive as we wanted it to look like.
Right.
We're going to change. So it is really important to have a remeasurement just to have the right objective data in the room. I have to say that this only makes sense if you also have the financial data. So I would strongly recommend for those who want to, do the retesting, always align it to financial KPI as well. Because that tells the whole story, right? It tells the story of we create value in terms of financial value and value for the customers. But at the same time, this value is created by a more constructive behavior or a more constructive mindset. And then if you have both of these in the room, it tells a compelling story. And it's, I mean, there is nothing more convincing than this fact, okay? And if you have done it, if you had the, I have to say, if you have the luck to have done it, because there are so many obstacles getting in the way on that journey. But if you can make clients operate like this, then the trust into the tool, the trust into the whole story of constructive creates actually also higher financial or superior financial results. It is then proven. It's not a theoretical, esoteric exercise.
Exactly. Yeah. We talk so much about demonstrating ROI when we get to the ends of these kinds of journeys. And it's something, as you said, it's very, very important. And even though I think it should only be part of the focus for why we're doing this kind of development, it's an important one that we need to be able to demonstrate. So, we do that in a variety of ways. Just for, reference, one is there's been quite a bit of research looking into how culture drives, those bottom lines kinds of performance. Another way that we do this is by utilizing the client's own data on things like employee turnover rates, sick days, stress, burnout rates, these sorts of things. And then we can match that data based on demographics to their culture data in the organization and illustrate to them that, the more constructive a culture your people experience, the fewer sick days we're experiencing, the lower rate of burnout, the lower employee turnover rates. So, employee retention and attracting best talent improves. So and that's the beauty of this, is we can really prove this within the client's organization. The challenge is it takes them to believe this, implement it, work toward it for 18 months, remeasure before we can come back and show them. Which is why for most of the clients, obviously, who go on this journey, in my experience, the first 18 to 24 months is the most critical. And you mentioned a couple of the things that really can be major derailers for organizations in those initial steps of this kind of growth journey. But once they get more input in the remeasurement around how, not only how they've grown and where that improvement has happened, but really the strongly positive effect of that growth on their business performance. And now we really reinvest typically in that next step of the journey. And that's when we again, in cases as well, tend to see the most growth and development. Sorry.
It supports a general
Yeah.
development, which goes more like in the sales area. People want to go from selling products to selling services to becoming more consultative, selling consultants to their clients, and we can then clearly say that a more constructive thinking on the Salesforce side, for example, really drives that customer satisfaction, because the skill of how to do consultative selling includes all the 4 constructive
Exactly.
and so on.
Yeah.
Then at a certain point in time, the tool gives you a clear measurement if you're on the right way. Once the customer says, wow, this is kind of an experience I don't want to miss, then you don't need the tool obviously anymore.
Right.
But somehow,
Right.
somehow on the journey, because we have so many people that are already used to product selling, for example, they need to make a transformation themselves, and the whole Salesforce needs to do a transformation themselves. So how do you help them, to come from product to consultative selling? That's just an example. You see it all over the place with all agile things, and therefore you need an objective measurement, right?
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes. And these things are becoming more transparent, I think, as the way of work changes and the way we perform in organizations changes. But it's becoming more apparent that sales teams are such a great example with the, historically competitive expectation versus now really focusing and realizing that it's more about the customer experience, at least if we're trying to drive, long-term sustainable growth as an organization. And it's another good example of research. We've got decades of research showing that customer experience, brand loyalty, likelihood to recommend your organization to other customers like them are outcomes that are strongly influenced by the culture of your business, the experience that your customers have when they interact with your people.
Right. Then there's another that is closely related to this, which is, what is the tipping point? When will your company be at that critical point where the system on constructive thinking and behavior takes over, so to speak?
Right.
You can see that clearly in the tool.
Yes.
Which is kind of at least 50% on the constructive styles, down to 10% on the passive defensive area, and only up to, let's say, 30% in single aggressive defensive styles. If you're on that way, you can clearly see you're approaching the tipping point from a company level. And the advantage is it will have a kind of a self-accelerating momentum once you enter the stage on a more systemic level. And how can you bring it there is the first, objectively bring it there without remeasuring. I think it's not possible, and you can also not determine it on a company level when that tipping point is reached, yes or not. But if you have the remeasurement, you can clearly steer the whole company in that direction, and you can use everything that the company has in its kind of toolbox set in order to do it, right? We see a lot of climate measuring going on the HR side, because that makes them kind of, they can then centrally, let's say, more or less also lead the company in a certain direction. They use a lot of climate measuring. What they don't do, or they don't do it transparently, is then to be very honest about what's our mindset here, showing what the mindset is, and are we going in the right direction? I mean, you can do it informally. You don't have to. You don't have to disclose it, in my opinion. But it doesn't make, if you're on that true journey and you call it that, then you have to be honest to yourself along the process. And this honesty will pay off. It would clearly indicate if you're on the right track or not.
Right. Right. Yeah. And again, that's a lot of, the honesty is a good word. That's sort of the point of giving people good data and information from our side so that they can make decisions based on good and from honest information that can lead them forward. But again, yes, assuming that the organization, its leaders are open to that kind of feedback and, the possibility that what's going on currently in our culture is not quite, which you find in every organization, is not quite what we say ideally should be taking place. But the real question is not where are we now, but what steps are we going to put in place to actually move this business forward, start role modeling the kind of behaviors that we want from people, and create that kind of change.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Go
the
ahead.
other option would be defensive itself, because the
Correct. Yes.
forward looking,
Mhm.
just learning from what we see and then do an effort, right?
Yes, that's such a good point. It's one of my things I like to tell clients. When you get the reports and data from, for example, from Human Synergistics, and you can look at and make tangible what the culture is and really understand it, you then sort of have a choice whether you're going to act on this information or not, I guess, is the fork in the road. But what's interesting is no matter what you do, you are still shaping culture. You're not going to get away from that. You're either going to take steps towards something that's more positive, more high performing, more consistent with values and performance that we need, or you're not going to act, which means you're going to actively maintain the status quo and continue what is currently going on.
Right.
You can't escape yeah.
And you can't, but the thing is, third point, an advantage is, of course, larger companies, how are you going to make a consistent move in this direction without
Correct.
common measurement in place?
Exactly.
It's not possible, full stop. And the thing is, when I look at the side, it's that kind of, we treat behavior different than our financial KPIs. But if you come to the conclusion that the strategy that you want to run needs a constructive style, like in the sales, I want to change the sales force from product selling, which may not give this kind of opportunities in the marketplace anymore, and I want to grow my sales by also, having a larger service portfolio and people able to consultative selling, then there is something here. Why if I have an objective of growing my sales from this to another percentage level, then I also need to grow the way of how we sell from a singular more achievement, or it can even be in the red area, but more achievement style, and broaden it up to a more self-actualizing and humanistic, encouraging concept that is more inclusive for the customer themselves. So why are not measuring these styles? Because they will clearly indicate if your sales force can even think in this way. If they don't have any kind of self-actualization in that, it's going to be a hard time for them, because they will not be creative in order to step away from let go the product focus and entering a field where they have to be in open conversation, be creative in the conversation itself, right? And
exactly. Sorry, examples of it. So we've actually done this with a client where they were moving from, they had teams who were moving from doing their work as they had traditionally to much more digital and adaptive structure. And we utilized the group styles inventory to look at how each of those teams currently interacts and approaches their work and so on. And we're able to give the client feedback in terms of which of their teams are going to be able to think in new adaptive ways, are interested in trying new methods to do their jobs, and are going to be more easily able to adopt these new adaptive digital and flexible structures rather than others, so that they could actually go in and begin coaching and supporting those teams that work in ways that make it difficult for them to try to be able to adapt and take on these new. So that kind of preemptive use of this information is very, very helpful.
Right, and again, it's as it is all transformation. These are all transformational processes. The retesting on the behavioral mindset side.
Right.
You can also, if you see it doesn't go the right way, that may indicate your immunity to change, so to speak. I mean, there may be some things in here that may prevent, but it also, the other view on it is the opportunity. It will show you the opportunity, what you need to do to go against that immunity. Otherwise, you will never make a progress, right? So that's on the it side, more or less. When we go on the individual, like the more
I
kind of view on
Yes.
the I side, it gives the people that are involved in these processes a clear sense of direction. And a clear sense of direction adds to psychological safety. If you are in a transformation process yourself, you need psychological safety to sustain it. Without being clear what you are doing and how you are doing it, and having this kind of stability points,
right.
with the retesting, it's going to be hard to sustain the ongoing transformation and the volition that is, or the willpower you need in order to go through this process in a healthy way. So it is kind of key, once you really mean it, that you have the stability points also from a measurement point of view. Clear sense of direction, psychological safety. These kind of, I mean, the tool, the Circumplex, it measures something that where you are in the current environment of people, of challenges, of structures. If you are in a different environment, your profile may look completely different. So the thing is that also here, you're on a continuous journey here, and it helps you in that specific context. And in this specific context, it stabilizes you out of the comfort zone. And you need to go out of the comfort zone. If we have blue profiles on individuals, we strongly encourage them to take the next challenge because they are ready for it. So how can you now transfer this kind of maturity that you've shown in this environment? Like, you know, go to a different country, whatever, right? How can you learn from and then put it into another one and another one? You know, one business at a time or one challenge at a time.
Yes.
So also on this, it gives you that kind of, I call it flow equilibrium out of the comfort zone. The retesting helps you to find that flow equilibrium, because you have to operate out of the comfort zone if you want to really work with this style, which also means your development or your potential can grow forever.
Yes.
And indicate that with the tool. You can see how, you know, you can look back and say, you know, this was the challenge here, this was my job here, and this is what I did. And then you see how, you know, how you transformed yourself, but also you transformed the environment, because you have a constructive impact on others then, right?
Yes.
That's another one. And energy level. The level of satisfaction. I mean, in the LSI, we have the last page where we have a clear tableau of energy level items, right?
Yes.
Which contribute or may distract from that energy. And what I see on the individual is people gain so much energy once they can really see they made a progress, because they first struggled with it. In the coaching itself, you define kind of small steps, and then they try out, and they come try out. And then there's always this guessing, was it good or not? And then you work maybe with feed forward or feedback loops in there, just that they can stabilize before the retesting happens.
Yes.
If the retesting confirms the positive feeling that this person has, he will go in another transformation journey because he is kind of re-energized by it. So, and it keeps the momentum. It even, it leverages the momentum, I would say. I mean, it can also have a negative leverage effect, of course, if nothing is going well. But I have to say the risk is kind of minor because you're close to the client. You have already a good impression of, you know, if she or he is making progress, and then bring the retesting always in as an energizing, a re-energizing tool. Not wait for it if you think that the client is not ready for it, because that will do the trick. That will not do the trick. It will do more harm. But if you can find that kind of right time to do it, it's an energy booster for the individual.
Completely agree. So we've even had clients who wanted to remeasure more in a shorter time frame than 9 or 12 months. And we always recommend at least that, we need that time for people to, like you said, try new things, come back, learn from that, create new patterns and habits, and then for those patterns and habits to be recognized and perceived by the people that they lead, and in a way that we can begin to capture in the remeasurement. So, and the other thing the other risk, or the other thing we have to manage, I think, on the front end of this is the client's own expectations, right? When they look at the remeasurement, typically, I agree with you, in the vast majority of cases, you see a positive shift, and that's tremendously energizing to the individual or team or organization. I rarely see them go in the negative direction, in the more defensive direction. But what I do see is clients just not being as satisfied with the development that they've had. In some cases, I've even seen organizations and teams make great really fantastic development, but they're still not happy with it because they expected. So there's something about managing that expectation for the remeasure, so that we can learn from it, not maybe be frustrated by not seeing as much development as we'd like. If I can also jump in, this is one of my favorite uses, by the way, of composite profiles, for example, for individuals in LSI and LWS and the impact tools, because then we can really hold a leadership team or a team accountable to development, but without identifying and isolating any individual, right? So we can measure how this leadership team is currently perceived by their people as a complete, aggregate. And then after 9 or 12 months of development and coaching each leader through their reports, we're going to remeasure. Each leader gets their own new report so that they can see how they've shifted. But what we will sort of assess is the overall development, again, by creating another composite and looking at how the team as a whole has shifted. And that gets back to your point around trying to get to the sort of that balance point in the circumplex around the 50th percentile, where we're trying to get the leadership team to the point where at least they're using constructive behavior more frequently than average, and moving away from those defensive styles. So good way to sort of hold the entire team accountable without sort of isolating or identifying any individuals.
Right, which would be an advantage on the we perspective.
Yes.
And, I mean, a much simpler,
getting ahead of you.
super important on the we side is the common language. I mean, you cannot underestimate that tool provides the opportunity to speak a common language around mindset and behavior, and this is super important in order to help the it advantages really flourish, right?
Yes.
But it's also important because now somebody else can help you, and you never transform yourself unless you go on the Eightfold Path of the Buddha. You will not transform yourself. Okay, we will always need somebody else, because we are in an it environment. We are not sitting on a mountain and doing meditation the whole day, which will transform the I level, the I side of things, but it will not transform the it side. I've never seen so many very successful Buddhists walking around business-wise. Okay, so the thing is, you need always somebody else to help you in this process. And it's this tool is such a beautiful, also if the result is not as good as you hoped it to be on the remeasurement, then there's a tremendous opportunity to ask people what you could do differently to make it work, or what the reason, if you look at the breakout profiles,
right.
step to your individual stakeholder groups, invite them, and then ask them, guys, I'm quite disappointed here. Help me to understand, what could I do better, differently, more or less, stop, do more, start doing, I don't know, right? So
right.
if you don't have it, you are there lost in suffering, the Buddhists would say.
True. And that's another interesting thing. It's sort of a side tangent, but when we look at breakout profiles or subgroups, basically in LSI and LWS, and even the impact tools, and you look at how that changes over time, you'll see that a lot of times focal participants will be focusing their efforts and development towards certain groups and not changing how they interact with other groups. So that's something we see in those reports is behavior is adaptive, and people frequently will behave differently toward, for example, peer groups than they behave toward direct reports or senior leaders. And oftentimes you'll also notice that in terms of development, they may have changed in terms of how they interact with their senior leader or peer group, but haven't really changed their approaches when they're working with their direct report. So that also creates a lot of insights in terms of why is that happening, and opportunities to learn. Yeah.
And from a leadership perspective, I mean, there are some brave leaders out there I've met during the years, really great people.
Yes.
We can use the whole thing in having very effective commitment conversations.
Yes. Agreed.
The thing is that if the openness is there, it depends on really, the leader needs to be constructive already. But then if you have, there are people out there, many people out there who have this quality, then they can, have very effective commitment conversations with individuals using their report and their retesting.
Yes. Well, and that's I'd love to come back to your point about they need to be constructive, because I think leaders can still shift organizations and move them forward, even if the behavior they're currently role modeling isn't really consistent with that, and they can recognize it. I think we might have even had a few clients along those lines. But I completely agree with you that when we roll out, especially for culture development, and we sort of roll out these initiatives and oftentimes begin, of course, with senior leadership, and begin with coaching them using these kinds of behavioral tools, that we may be doing that for 12 months before we're then rolling that out to the next level and cascading it, which is an ideal process, because then those senior leaders really can share their learnings, their experiences with the next level, and serve as part of the support process by which, the next level of the organization moves forward and grows. So
and if you have the other type of leaders, that's then for you as a coach, the opportunity to have effective commitment conversations with your coachee, right? So there's always kind of, there are only opportunities if you do it. If you don't do it, you rob yourself of a learning opportunity. And that's really the key of why this measuring and remeasuring on a continuous basis, it absolutely makes sense. If you don't do it, the question really comes up, why did you start it in the first place?
Correct. Very good question. Yes.
Because I can, and actually this is the more common way of doing it, starting things and then not continuing on that level for whatever reason, fear or what financial reasons. I have not understood this, because the advantages are so compelling that there is no real reason, except you would say we don't need it anymore. So why did you do it in the first place?
Exactly. Yes. Sometimes when we have conversations with clients about survey fatigue, I bring up a statement that's sort of along those lines. And it's, if they're worried about answering one of our assessments, then, and they start saying, well, we have all these other tools, then my question is, well, what are you doing with those other tools? And that also goes for human synergistics tools. If you're not going to act on this information and use it, then don't waste your people's time and your money in administering it. The purpose of these things is to learn from them and to create real and sustainable positive change in organizations, not to answer a survey. That's not the purpose. So yes, and we try very much, it's when we talk to clients, and this as well, initially about the purpose by which they're interested in measuring culture, developing leaders, we really try to understand those whys as well as we can, because everything else is built upon that. And that comes back to remeasurement. We want to be able to show, I always say, I want to be able to show the client that when we remeasure, we've addressed the original why are we doing this reason for the tools. I want to be able to show that this is paying off, that we can understand why these things are playing out in the business, and that as positive steps are taken, we can demonstrate improvement. So all good things to help get over that initial step. I also agree with you. That's sort of the riskiest step in the entire journey, is the time, I usually say, at which the client gets the reports in their hands, the time at which, right after that, whether they really take that feedback as a positive learning opportunity, and do something with it and act upon it and learn from it, or whether they take that somehow differently and fail to use it for its potential.
Just what came always in between, the thing about the aggressive defensive styles. What I learned in projects is that oftentimes the pure, let's say, bluish constructive styles were perceived as too theoretical, as a noble, let's say, a noble truth or a noble idea.
Nirvana, but not real. Yeah.
And but at the end of the day, some positioning needs to go on, some willpower needs to be
exerted. Yeah.
Some things need to, some direction must be given somewhere.
Correct.
And then what I saw here is that, and I think it's totally misleading, by the way, but the thing is that they say, okay, the tool does not give a clear orientation, because we need to have some of the aggressive defensive style in it, and think, and we see it pays off, it makes us more successful, and therefore there is not that clear kind of guidance that we can gain from the tool. Also, if we would reassess, there's still not clear of how much of this kind of aggressive defensive-ness do I need, and then you care, and then it gets into this kind of, maybe we don't need it. It's like,
right. Yes. Well, that's a whole conversation, and happy to get into that one. But I mean, my favorite answer to that question is they can have as much aggressive behavior in their culture, teamwork, or leadership as they believe and describe as appropriate. And that's very much the reason that Human Synergistics developed like the ideal description of OCI for culture, so that organizations could describe that for themselves. They don't have to take it from, us and research and so on to believe that constructive behavior is going to tend to be the most consistently positive on their performance. And unfortunately, aggressive and defensive behavior will ultimately detract. But they can describe that for themselves. And I always say I've never argued with a client in terms of their ideal description. Whatever you tell me is going to help you run your business best, we'll agree with that and use that as the target that we're moving toward. The next questions are, where are we now, and how do we move and close that gap? There are multiple different ways to answer that question around aggression. I really think at the high level, it's a terminology confusion, because aggressive business in a business context sounds very good. And actually, we don't really disagree. We're just referring to different, well, parts of the model. When the client is talking about aggressive, they want an aggressive business that is competitive and perfect. They're really referring primarily to what we would call outcomes. We want to be competitive against other organizations in the industry. We want to be first to market. We want to have perfect products and services. That sort of thing, and we don't disagree. However, in order to do that, you actually don't want aggressive, what we describe as aggressive behavior within the organization. That's a lot of people basically working against one another within the organization. And that ultimately takes attention off of things like how do we compete against the competition and be first to market, and also wastes a lot of employee effort and motivation, as we're really have inconsistent goals and are working against people within the business. The other ways I like to talk, and then I promise I'll stop, but we've been through this a few times, is with data. Having clients, especially at the organizational level, actually look at how aggressive behavior affects their people and their performance, especially if we've included customized criteria, KPIs, like engagement and psychological safety and diversity and inclusion. And these are custom, KPI criteria that we build into culture projects, and then we can run custom correlation analyses showing how the culture is affecting your people's psychological safety and ability to collaborate and so on. And unfortunately, those aggressive patterns, and I came from research, I've been in HS for 15 years, they always are negative in their effect on that kind of psychological well-being and measures of performance. And that's another helpful thing that we can show to clients, but unfortunately it means we have to run the project first before we can come back to you and clarify where in fact you really want to go. But it is a helpful one. I still prefer using ideals to let the client just describe for themselves. That tends to be the most effective, and we do that at various levels. But I agree with you. There's that's a topic to discuss. Sorry.
This would be my last comment on the advantage side of retesting. Because of course, if you ask anyone, give me the ideal, and they sit somewhere in the sun of everything, of course the ideal will always be constructive. There is no other way. Otherwise you have not the life as itself. But the thing is, when those who are familiar with spiral dynamics, life will throw challenges at us, and we are at different maturity levels. At that maturity levels, there's always a risk to become defensive. So there is no other way around. We will always see the profiles. And now comes the retesting. It's not so important that you have defensive profiles. That's the question is, are they helping you on the way, or are they not helping you on the way?
Right, exactly.
And then which of those? And then you drill into the details, and then you say, okay, we have to do a little bit here and a little bit there. You laser fine tune kind of transformation that you're going through. But how will you then see, without retesting, that you have done the right initiative?
Exactly.
You will not see it. And the real value is not in looking at the individual profile and being surprised, oh, there is defensive behavior in there. It will always be behavior in there.
Yes, there always will be. Yes.
And the thing is, what did you want to change because it's not doing you good anymore on the organization, on the team, on the individual level? And where do you see that happening, that it's really successful and that turns
exactly?
How do you measure success? So.
Yeah, I love, just to add to, I'll try to be brief to that, but I love the way you describe that. So, I mean, yes, of course, people, when we describe ideals across industry, across global regions, will consistently describe, when we sit back and think and reflect about how we should best work together in order to be at our best, they describe constructive behavior. I mean, that shouldn't be so surprising that it's that consistent. Basically, it's telling us that human beings are pretty accurate and aware of being able to describe the kinds of healthy, psychological, goal-oriented, and collaborative behaviors that will enable them to get things done. That we can recognize that, and that's the. But you're right, life always throws things at us, right? And we need to be able, and behavior is adaptive. And this is a good conversation to talk about in terms of thinking of constructive behavior as inherently good or positive or right in terms of values, whereas defensive behavior is somehow wrong or bad or so on. That's something not appropriate. I like to say when we think about outcome, right and wrong and good and bad, we need to think about outcomes again. It's not a good thing if your people are stressed and in conflict. It is a good thing if they're adaptive and taking care of customers and engaged and so on. When we think about these behavioral patterns, we need to think about what is enabling us to perform at our best, achieve those goals, and what patterns of behavior might be getting in the way. And that's, sorry, the other point I wanted to make. A lot of times there seems to be confusion around individual, what I would call items, sort of the individual behaviors within the scales, within the patterns, and the patterns themselves. And it's an important one because a lot of times people will look at defensive behavior, especially aggressive behavior, and they'll look at the questions that were asked within that scale, and they'll say, well, you know, what's wrong with whatever the item may be? What's wrong with pointing out flaws is sort of the classic one, right? And the answer is absolutely nothing. The individual items are not what are predicting and driving, you know, engagement and motivation and creative thinking and so on. It's the pattern playing out across those items and that has the effect. So when we start seeing those high levels of stress and conflict and whatever it may be within the teams, you know, it's not any one of those behaviors, but again, the extent of those patterns that begin to be. My favorite example of this is actually like procrastination, right? It's an item and it has to do with a behavior within avoidance, just procrastinating. There are situations you can argue in which procrastinating is the right thing to do. It's the most effective way to respond given the situation and circumstance. However, if procrastination becomes a pattern and the primary way by which I try to get my work done, that pattern is going to start to have a pretty predictive consequence on my performance and well-being. So, and that's again something that we can see in remeasurement, and it's one way to look at that. Those remeasurements, I always try when we look at culture and others, is you don't want to see just changes in the items. You know, I'm using one behavior more. You want to see a change across all of the items within that scale. That's when you know you're really shaping the pattern of behavior of the individual or team or organization's culture.
Right. Yeah, basically, that were my 9+1 advantages for retesting.
Very good. I
We
can't
have
agree more.
kind of